Hi friends, I am Suman Dash Vidya-mitra from National Law University, Odisha, Cuttack, and I am an assistant professor of law here. Today, in course of the course in advanced jurisprudence, we will be discussing a module which has been titled Greek and Roman Conceptions of Natural Law. To introduce the topic, we must have a clear-cut idea of the origins of natural law, what natural law stands for, what portions of modern law we owe to the idea of natural law. So, modern conceptions of law and justice are linked with ancient Greek and Roman scholars in terms of content and approach. Greeks and Romans by far are the most ancient in terms of contributing to the ideas of natural law that are so sacrosanct even today. So, modern notions of equality, equal application of laws, human rights and sovereignty are all incomplete if we do not understand the facets and the concept of natural law, which is inherent in all laws that we come across and is the litmus test for determining the legitimacy of every law. Natural law is universal, it's ubiquitous and is applicable to all without distinctions of either caste, creed, gender, geography and other such parameters. An understanding of the evolution of natural law is necessary to study the growth of law as it exists today across civilizations and cultures. And the only way to do so is to begin with the origins of natural law in early Greek and Roman societies. Before we proceed to the next slide, I would like to make a slight mention here that Roman civilization and Greek civilization have been unique because of the philosophy in terms of the content of the law and political discourse that are inherent in their literary creations. So, let us now take a look at the objectives of this module. The first objective that I would like to share with you as we work in progress towards this module is to acquaint you with the evolution, history and development of natural law in ancient Greece and Rome. The second objective of this module will be to expose students to the philosophy of prominent Greek and Roman scholars and their schools of thought. Finally, the third objective will be to inform students of the contribution of significant scholars to the field of modern law. Conception of natural law among Greeks. This is that significant aspect of this module which must be dealt with very carefully, because in order to understand the growth of natural law, contribution of Greeks was significant, has remained significant till date. And we must have a clear-cut idea of what Greeks conceived natural law to be. Now, the Greeks were the earliest, they were the foremost to have a conception of natural law principles. They were the first to distinguish law from elements of blind faith, mysticism, abstract concepts. They were the first to give law a definite, concrete shape. For the first time in the history of Greek society and in the history of law, we came across Greeks, Greek philosophers who contributed to natural law the idea that universal principles exist. These universal principles are uniform all throughout the world, throughout the cosmos, and they are the same for every single individual. The idea of universal principles was linked by the Greeks with philosophical pursuits which they made, as in the Greek philosophers made, concerning the human society, social norms and moral values. Now, this journey has best been described by William Friedman as a search for absolute values. It has been designated as a search for absolute values because Greek philosophy was about it. It was about looking for those absolute values, those absolute concepts, the perfection in law which they termed as universal, which they termed as perfect and complete. This, according to them, laid down the foundations of natural law as we know it today. The major contributors of the Greek era were the Sophists in the 5th century BC and the Stoics. So, as we begin the study of Greek philosophy, we would like to study Greek philosophy from these two major perspectives. Let us take a look at what Sophists did in order to contribute to natural law principles. I would like to make a mention here that Sophists who came into the picture around the 5th century BC were the ones to come up with the most nascent ideas of law. They were the ones who were considered to be a very brilliant group of philosophers who had different perspectives, a completely different idea and approach towards life, society, and the way human life should be regulated. This is where they laid down the foundation of natural law principles as we know them today. Now, during the 5th century BC, social circumstances were very different. We could see during that time that there were frequent changes in the laws in the city-states, and these frequent changes in laws and in their application triggered the Sophists to conceive of the body of law as an entity which needs to be deciphered, which needs to have a distinct shape. This put the Sophists in a thinking mode where they tried to figure out what exactly was the objective of law, how law should be approached, and what should define the content of law. This is exactly where during this period, that is, this is exactly the period where we find that Greek scholars shifted from traditional and ancient values. Now, I think giving a backdrop of the 5th century BC and what happened in the city-states at that point of time is something which we shouldn't miss out on. Before this, you had people linking law or social control processes with religion, with blind faith, with dogmas, with entities which were abstract and beyond the conception of mankind. Now, this is also precisely where the 5th century BC became relevant. When laws started changing so frequently, it was at this point of time that the Sophists started having a conception of law which was very different from their predecessors and was unique in the sense that for the first time the world was starting to think about the functions of law and the entity that law stood for. So, the first salient feature of the Sophist philosophy was that the Sophists laid down law as a purely human invention. They said that law is born out of necessity, it is alterable at will, and is detached entirely from the world of metaphysics. I think I should explain these points a bit more, in the sense that when you say law is born out of necessity, what exactly is meant by it? According to Sophist scholars, law was not a natural creation. It did not come altogether with nature. It was invented by human beings for their own protection and for meeting their own needs. What those needs and goals were, philosophers varied among themselves in determining. However, what characterizes Sophist philosophy is the idea that natural law, or for that matter the body of law, is something which has been created by human will, is alterable at the desire of human beings, and is completely detached from all metaphysical elements that we come across. And the conclusion of every Sophist philosopher that we come across was that natural law is a body of law which is entirely different from and is opposed to written law. So, they made primary divisions between two forms of law, one that they called natural and the other that they referred to as written law. According to the Sophist philosophers, natural law was prevalent or was supposed to be prevalent as something which was divine in its origin, or at the least was superior to every other form of law that human society would have confronted. And at the same time, they said it was entirely opposed to written law. In his magnum opus, Antigone, Sophocles, a leading sophist philosopher, has talked a great deal about natural law. So, for instance, he says, natural law is wise, but written law is arbitrary. Now, like I said in the previous slide, as I pointed out there, natural law was considered to be very different from the domain of written law. One, natural law was considered to be supreme, whereas written law was considered to be a creature of mankind, which was something which was much inferior to the idea of natural law. So, Sophocles made this point a bit more clear in Antigone while stating that natural law is a wiser entity than written law, which is considered to be arbitrary. So, while it was right, for instance, for the protagonist in Antigone to argue that somebody may not follow what is the written law, but at the same time may not be violating the law because he might be in consonance with natural law. That is what was captured in Antigone, and Sophocles was very vocal about it. Then you had Heraclitus, who for the first time considered nature and law to be a relation of things. He considered nature not as an entity, but as a rhythm of events, a superior entity, a body of permanent uniform rules. For the first time, the ambiguous nature of law started gaining some prominence here, because nature, once it was started being considered as supreme, natural law was also equally considered to be a superior entity. Thereafter, we had Callicles. Callicles argued about the right of the strong. According to Callicles, it is natural for human beings to be unequal. And according to him, equality is a state which is artificial or created by mankind, because equality is not what nature bestows on mankind. So, that being the case, he said, people are entitled to different things, are entitled to different rights and privileges based on their capacities, and all individuals are not equal in their capacities. Might, according to him, was right, and therefore law was something which existed for the betterment of the strong. We then had the great sophist philosopher Thrasymachus. According to Thrasymachus, law was a weapon of the strong to further their objectives. So, like Callicles, Thrasymachus also argued that might is right, or that the right of the strong is something which is justified because that is the natural state of things. But he added another contention to it when he said that it is a weapon in the hands of the strong to further their objectives. With this, then let us move to the great sophist philosopher Plato, the disciple of Socrates, whose philosophy has been tremendously impacted by the teachings of Socrates. Socrates influenced Plato in his conception of natural law in a very significant way, because Socrates was entirely opposed to what Thrasymachus or Callicles taught. While Thrasymachus or Callicles argued that law existed to further the cause of the strong, Socrates was of the opinion that this is a perverted version of understanding law. This is exactly where Plato borrows the ideas of Socrates and takes it much further. So, Plato also believed, like Socrates did, and some of his predecessors also did, that there is an innate inequality among human beings. He considered human beings to be not equal in spirit. He considered them to be unequal in terms of their capacities, either physical, mental, rational, as well as psychological. On the basis of this inherent understanding of the inequality of human beings, Plato conceived of a class system. The class system of Plato, as we will see a little later, is an idealist philosophy wherein he justified the division of society into 4 significant segments on the basis of individual capacity. The fourfold division of society, according to Plato, was justified on the premise that people have different capacities. And as per the capacity, we have to put them in one of the 4 categories. So, Plato divided society into 4 segments: the gold, the silver, copper and iron. The copper and iron, the last 2 groups that we see in society according to Plato, were that segment of society which had the maximum number in society and the maximum strength, because we had more number of individuals who could fit into either the copper category or the iron category. On the other hand, we had individuals of superior intellectual and physical abilities categorized in the gold and silver categories. While the gold and silver categories were considered to be nobles, the gold were considered to be individuals having capacities of intellectual pursuits or administrative capacities, and the silver as well were considered to be ones who were supposed to protect the other segments of society. So, the functions of the 4 classes were different according to Plato. So, also their rights and privileges were supposed to be different. So, for instance, Plato remarked that people who belonged to the segments of copper and iron were entitled to pursue a convenient lifestyle, were entitled to found families, and were entitled to lead normal lives of marriage and of other social functions which are expected of normal human beings to be performed. On the other hand, the people belonging to gold and silver categories were supposed to lead a life of sacrifice, renunciation, and something which was devoted to the cause of the state, to the protection of the copper and iron segments. Now, the gold and silver segments were those segments who were nobles, were capable of intellectual pursuits, and expectations of the state would be greater from them because they were capable of performing more. So, people belonging to gold and silver segments were not allowed, according to Plato, to found families just like copper and iron segments did. They were not allowed to have relationships in the same way as people belonging to copper and iron segments did. According to Plato, people who belong to the 4 categories would produce people or bring about human beings who were like them, but he did not rule out the possibility of a copper being born out of gold or a gold being born out of copper or iron. Plato's notion or the Platonic idea of society, as he pointed out, was conceived of in a very idealistic way. The ideals that he propagated were then to be carried out, sometimes even criticized. But what is noteworthy in Platonic philosophy is his tremendous dislike for the idea of law. According to Plato, law is a bunch of simple principles which is not applicable to the complexities of human life. According to Plato, the mathematical formulations which exist in rules and regulations are too simplistic, far too simplistic to be applied in real life. That being the case, he justified the idea that law as a means of social control or law as something which must be looked up to was not acceptable to. Plato was followed by his disciple Aristotle, who also contributed significantly to the concept of natural law. Aristotle's philosophy or approach towards the idea of law was characterized by a deep and pragmatic understanding of human nature. Unlike Plato, whose conception of justice and whose conception or ideas about law were primarily idealistic, Aristotle believed that we should have a system of law or a system of justice which is in consonance with the spirit of humanity, with the capacity that humanity stands for. So while he believed that Plato's conception of justice demands ultimate nobility, he also believed that the average human being is not capable of as much nobility as Plato demands from him. It is in this context that he also said that man is a rational animal. So according to Aristotle, everything about a human being is akin to what an animal is about or what an animal stands for, but the only thing which distinguishes man from other animals is the fact that he has been endowed with an entity called rationality. So when we say that man is a rational animal was Aristotle's philosophy, Aristotle's approach towards safeguarding human beings, towards controlling human beings was also equally pragmatic. So according to Aristotle, man is the best animal when he is controlled by law, but segregation from law makes him the worst creature in mankind or in nature, which means that for him the legal system, laws and justice were to be oriented according to the capacities of mankind. And this is where he said that rationality is the determinant in identifying the content of law. So Aristotle says that law must be treated as supreme and not individuals, because no human being is above the pollution of vices that come with untrammeled power and pride. Secondly, he stated that natural justice is a body of those principles which could never be altered and had the same validity everywhere. According to him, legitimacy of these principles did not depend on their acceptance or non-acceptance by any segment of society or individuals. Now, while I discuss these 3 points with you, I think it is important for me and also pertinent to mention that Aristotle's conception of law was or has to be seen from an aspect where he treats individuals to be far below the platform of law. According to him, if power is vested in the hands of law, society can progress. On the other hand, if power is vested in the hands of human beings, there is every chance that society would crumble, because according to him, an average human being is never capable of nobility to the extent that his predecessors like Plato might have conceived of. So while he believed that capacity of human beings is to be gauged as the utmost factor in determining whether law should be existing and what should be the content of law, at the same time he also discussed that legitimacy of principles of law would always be independent from the aspect of their acceptance by society. So Aristotle also evolved the conception of conventional justice, which according to him was capable of variations and alterations. So on the one hand, he said that we have principles of natural justice which remain uniform and are equally applicable to all. They know of no variation, but at the same time we have the idea of conventional justice which is capable of variations and alterations depending on the necessities or requirements of a society. So as one can see, Aristotle marked the beginning of a very significant qualitative change in the concept of Greek philosophy. It was a change from idealism to realism, from abstraction to concreteness, from radical arguments to a state of balance in the idea of law and justice. And humanity owes it to Aristotle when it gets down to the understanding and conception of natural law in the form of concreteness that we do today. After the Sophist philosophers, it would be pertinent for us to have a look at the Stoic idea of natural law. Stoics were followed by the Sophists who had come into the picture during the 5th century BC. And the Stoic idea of justice or the Stoic idea of law was significantly influenced by Aristotle's conception of law and his emphasis on the element of reason in man. So the Stoics' philosophy of justice was definitely inspired by Aristotle's magnum opus, Logic. The Stoic school was led by Zeno and his followers. The Stoics identified God with nature, so they were pantheists, and according to them, law could be conceived only with nature at the center. Stoics advocated for unity of all human beings and believed that law prevails in human reason. According to them, all human beings are equal and laws therefore are applicable to all equally without any discrimination. They propagated a cosmopolitan philosophy where distinctions between all city-states would pale into oblivion. They built their philosophy on the premise that natural laws have universal validity and are not capable of change in any part of the world. After discussing the Greeks' contribution to the world of natural law, to the domain and principles of natural law, it would now be pertinent for us to take a look at the Romans and their contribution to natural law. In order to appreciate the positioning of natural law in ancient Rome, we need to distinguish with clarity between three different segments of Roman law and three simultaneous concepts which were in vogue in the Roman legal system. The first one is jus civile or jus civile, followed by jus gentium and then by jus natural. Jus civile refers to the civil system, civil law of Rome. It was meant for all citizens of Rome and was not applicable to people who were non-citizens or who were not citizens of Rome. Likewise, jus gentium referred to a body of principles which was applied to non-citizens. It reflected the common principles which were found across all legal systems of the world. Jus natural referred literally to natural law, though it carried different connotations in the writing of different philosophers. Now, jus natural or natural law has in the context of Roman legal system been understood in two primary perspectives. One was in the sense of a higher order of principles providing a validating yardstick for the positive law made by men. The most vocal expression of this perspective has been seen in the writings of Cicero. In the other sense, it was used by many Roman jurists as reflecting not a universal law of higher order, but a reasonable proposition oriented towards the solution of a given case. So in this sense, it was more particular in its approach and not general. In its latter sense, natural law represented a prima facie reasonable proposition rather than an enlightened rationality. The most prominent of Roman scholars whose work contributed significantly to the idea of natural law was Cicero. Like the Stoic philosophers, Cicero considered the faculty of reason as the fulcrum of the universe. He identified true law as reason in conformity with nature and contended it to be of universal application and immutable character. The nature of this law was to be beyond the confines of countries and societies, which meant that it was applicable in a cosmopolitan manner, was applicable to all individuals without any distinctions of geography, gender and other such parameters. He invested law with the force of nature as designed by divine dispensation. The element of reason present in intelligent men was the parameter for the justness of an act. The faculty of reason in every man ensures that a sense of justice is inherent in human nature. Cicero was categorical in his view that natural law presented us with a yardstick to judge the validity of positive law enacted by any ruler, howsoever legitimate. So we can see now, before we conclude, a mention must be made that Roman legal system or the Romans' conception of law and justice is to be seen as an entity which was again higher than any human being or any legal entity which was created by human beings. So as we conclude, let us take a look at what we discussed today. The first thing that I discussed with you today was in relation to the Greeks' conception of law. As I said earlier, the Greeks were the first to conceive of law as a distinct entity. They distinguished law from all other entities including metaphysics, blind faith, dogmas, and all abstract entities that it was earlier associated with. Not only that, the Greeks were the first to distinguish between written and unwritten law. According to the Greeks, unwritten law was a higher or supreme form of law, whereas written law was capable of change and was applicable to certain situations of specificity. It was not a general premise, not cosmopolitan in nature, and was supposed to be followed as per needs and necessities of people. Stoics and Sophists were the primary two branches of Greek school of thought. When we say Stoics, we refer to Zeno and his followers, whereas Sophists included people like philosophers like Aristotle, Plato, and his predecessors. Among the Sophists, Plato and Aristotle have contributed tremendously to the domain of natural law. Here we must not forget that while Plato's approach was idealistic, Aristotle's was more pragmatic in nature. Here I would also like to recapitulate that Plato's conception of law demanded ultimate nobility from human beings. He divided human beings into 4 different segments as per their individual capacities, because he believed human beings to be unequal or unequal in their capacities. On the other hand, Aristotle, who was also following most of the teachings of Plato, believed that human beings are not capable of ultimate nobility because the average human being is prone to vices that come with pride, that come with many other things like lies and other vices which have an impact on the structure of law, the connotation of law. This is where Plato believed that human beings are capable of taking society ahead and that the law is not to be trusted, which is why he also disliked the conception of law. On the other hand, Aristotle believed that law must always remain supreme because it is the law which can guard against the vices of human beings and must therefore be superior to all entities who are human in nature. In the entire discourse, what we come across from the understanding of philosophers who were Greek was the conception that law is an agency which is connected very intricately with society. It is capable of influencing society in significant manners, methods and ways, which is why it is also necessary for us to keep in mind that the law is something which is to be used in a manner which is equal for everybody. So, while human made laws or human interventions in laws were considered to be capable of change, were also considered to be capable of being arbitrary, principles or universal principles of natural law were supposed to be cosmopolitan. They were supposed to be applicable equally to all human beings without any difference in terms of gender or in terms of geography or any other phenomenon. Apart from the Greeks, the Roman contribution to law is also significant. Romans conceived of law as an entity in the same way as the Stoics did. Now, if you look at it, if we analyze the discourses that we just discussed, we will arrive at the conclusion, and a very important part of it is that the Romans really did not conceive of any original legal principle, or their contribution in terms of originality to the domain of law was minimal. However, what is striking about Roman jurisprudence or Roman's conception of law or legal systems is that they tried to include the existing principles of law in the just civil systems. So, this is where the incorporation of natural law principles in the jus civile systems or that system of law which is applicable to citizens as well as non-citizens becomes relevant. So, the Roman conception of law was heavily influenced by Stoic philosophy. Their contribution may not be really original in terms of content, in terms of what they did to the existing system of law, but certainly their contribution was significant because of the simple reason that they tried to incorporate all these principles in the existing legal systems. With this, I would like to end our discussion on the Roman and Greek conceptions of natural law. I hope you found it useful. Thank you.